The topic of our next panel is the road ahead: AI, IoT, edge, connected cars, connected homes, broadband edge, and bridging the digital divide. We will hear from industry luminaries about the impact of underlying digital infrastructure to the up-and-coming new technologies and use cases, how digital infrastructure advancements can help bridge the digital divide. I'd like to now call upon the esteemed speakers of this panel who will provide both a global and regional perspective on this important topic. I'd like to ask the panelists to come on stage as I take their names. Stéphane Georges-Girid, CEO of Arelion. I hope I got that right, or closer. I've been practicing his last name. Steve Alexander, CTO and co-founder of Ciena. Zaid Khan, GM Cloud, AI and Advanced Systems, Microsoft. Nick Surfras, CEO of Richmond Technology Council. And Gary Wood, President and CEO of Firefly Fiber Broadband. Thank you. And the moderator needs no introduction. My personal favorite, an internet pioneer and widely recognized as the father of internet, Vint Cerf. Dr. Vint Cerf is evangelist of Google and chairman of IAIC, and he's going to lead the discussion. Over to you, Vint. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please be seated, gentlemen. So this last panel, thank you all for sticking around, first of all. This last panel is pretty important because the notion of inclusion seems to be essential if we're all going to harvest the benefits of the investments that we've been talking about for the entire day. We have to make sure that literally everyone is able to take advantage of these technologies, and that means accessibility is important, as is affordability and reliability and safety and security and all these other things. So I actually wanted to start out by asking each of you, or actually inviting each of you, to introduce yourselves and to offer a framing statement about your view of inclusion. And given that the title, This is the Road Ahead, if you also have some observations about what we are going to face trying to achieve this universal inclusion, you're welcome to make those comments as well. So let me start with you, Gary. Who the hell are you and what are you doing here?
Thanks. My wife asked me that some mornings, but that's okay. Well, first of all, thanks for giving all of us the opportunity, but particularly for me, to come up and sit with such an esteemed group up here. And Scott Brown somewhere used my name in vain already a couple times. I am the president and CEO at Central Virginia Electric Co-op, so I'll talk a little bit on the electric side, and our wholly owned subsidiary, Firefly Fiber Broadband. The electric co-op that I am with started in the late 90s trying to solve the problem for our electric customers in rural Virginia who didn't have internet service. And for a while we offered dial-up internet, then we tried broadband over power line, which didn't quite break through. So in 2017, before COVID, and before a lot of government funding, we decided to undertake a project to build fiber across our 4,500-mile distribution network. We're completing that project this year. We're going to be in front of 40,000 homes that otherwise, for the most part, had no broadband connectivity options. A few folks had DSL that was providing 1 to 5 megabit per second service. And we're bringing true broadband connectivity because we believe that if you choose to live in a beautiful part of rural Virginia, you should not sacrifice in terms of quality of life with access to the internet. With COVID, we've really seen the importance of that for remote work, for virtual classrooms, for telemedicine. We're seeing about a 60% connection rate when we, as we pass homes, and we've got just under 20,000 folks connected now. And then more recently, Firefly's looked outside that Central Virginia Electric footprint and partnered with a couple of other utilities, Dominion Energy and Rappahannock Electric, through the support of some state grant programs. And the state of Virginia has done a really good job of committing to make sure every location in Virginia has broadband access. So over the next 3 years, we'll double that project we've already done. So I'm fairly new into the internet world. I'm old in terms of rural infrastructure, but it's an exciting new opportunity, and there's just a thirst and a need for the internet to access all these great things that we've talked about, to make use of the everything comes through the data centers, to work with the Internet of Things, to make our Ring doorbells work. So that's my story. That's why I'm up here. Thanks.
And you're sticking with it. Well, thank you for that. I mean, delivering electrons and delivering bits, there's nothing more productive than I can think of. Let's keep going.
My name is Nick Surface. I'm the CEO of the Richmond Technology Council. And when I think about connectivity, I come at it from a perspective of talent and workforce development, and the way that accessibility provides equity to people coming through that pipeline right now. People in the K through 12 space need that connectivity in order to fund and support our technology workforce. So we have a robust portfolio of companies and businesses here in the greater Richmond area, and they need people who can help support them. So we need to develop that talent and workforce, and that comes through equity of connectivity.
Thanks very much, Nick. Zaid.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I think a lot of you know me as someone who has worked in internet infrastructure from edge to application, but in the last 3 years, I've been sort of focused on AI inside the data center all the way to the edge. And what's interesting in what I'm seeing is I'm working on things that are 2 to 5 years out. And so living in the future is incredibly hard because everybody's not there yet. But what I'm seeing is that software and hardware are becoming sort of like incompatible. Software is moving so fast, and infrastructure development is moving a lot slower. So I'd love to have a conversation about it, but just in general, this is kind of like the problems that I'm working on today. And I lead the Cloud AI and Advanced Systems group at Microsoft focusing on this.
Let's keep going.
I'm Steve Alexander. I'm the CTO of Ciena. A bit different from the other folks you've heard today. We build the equipment that lights the fibers, right? So it's between equipment like ours and the folks who actually own the fiber infrastructure. Then all of a sudden you've got the circulatory system for the internet. I mean, I think you raise a really good point, which is inclusion. How do you make it accessible to folks, right? And one thing that we have worked diligently on for now 2 decades, and Ciena is very fortunate to have been the company that introduced DWDM, right? So multiple colors of fiber of light on a fiber, as well as coherent detection, which is using one laser to measure another one to get more capacity, right? Those are the 2 contributions we've made. We've been able to dramatically shrink what this equipment looks like, right? So if I took you back to, and Vin, you would remember this, 40 gigabits. When we got started, first WDM system was 1 full telco bay. So imagine something 24 inches wide, 24 inches deep, 6 feet tall was 40 gigabits. You can now take 10 of those things, and I brought one because it's just such an amazing change. This is the new 400ZR. That's 400 gigabits in the palm of my hand. All right, so that's 10 telco bays from 20 years ago. Right, so the reason I like to show this to people is if you grew up in the typical telco world, you think a terabit is it's big iron, and it's real complicated. This is 400 gigabits in your hand. Right? Now this isn't going to light a submarine cable. This is going to go 40, 50 kilometers. This is more data center, interconnect, edge, metro. But this is how they're going to get to the long distance fibers. Right? And for the folks who are putting fiber in the ground, My ask is think a little bit differently about it now, because there are absolutely reasons why we put a fiber in the ground and we light it at a gigabit. There's great economic reasons. But also start to think of, okay, with one of these, it's now 400 gig. And with different technology, it's now terabits. Right? You're putting in a highway system that, okay, today you're using it like one single lane, but with just changing equipment at the edge, you've got a 100-lane highway sitting there. I mean, that's a different way of thinking about the kind of infrastructure investment you're making. So we're all about capacity, driving costs down, making it simpler, easier to deploy. That's a big piece of inclusion.
Why does it feel like all 400 gigabits a second are going into my email box?
Because you're a very popular guy, Vint.
Stefan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Staffan Jöryd. I'm a CEO for Aurelion, and I'm based out of Stockholm, Sweden. We've been talking about naps a lot today. It's about 10:10 local time in Sweden, so in case I doze off,
So if you fall asleep, we'll
yeah,
understand.
exactly. For those of you who doesn't know who Aurelion is, I'll put it a little bit into context in the ecosystem. We are, someone else described it earlier today, that internet is a networks of a lot of different networks, essentially, right? And you have local providers, you have regional providers, you have continental providers, and you have a select few global providers, and we're one of those real fundamentals of the global internet core. Servicing customers in about 125 countries or so. We've been growing organically here in the US for about 25 years, even from this state in Virginia here as well. I think from the back in the days when May East was in a little bit of a storage room in the basement in Tyson's Corner. And then you see what's been built here today, right, in Enrico County. I think it's just astonishing development in that sense, right? So, looking at the future a little bit and where we are, I think you had a great example here with just the amount of innovation that has gone into technology and development on that side, and how much you can actually cram out of a fiber today that you couldn't before. Maybe the systems, the first one we deployed, I think here in the States, was 400 gig. Today you can get 35 terabit out of the exact same fiber. So I think we're all problem solvers in some ways, right? This entire industry is problem solvers. And I think that that's really something that we will continue to achieve going forward. So I think it's a little bit of a question of what is the next problem? I think that's more the challenge, right? And if I knew, I would probably not be sitting here. I would probably be busy trying to solve it somewhere. Right? But I think that's actually a big question, I think.
So I don't mean to cut you off, but no. I want to underscore what you just said. And the problem is not solving the problem. Yes, that's a big and important thing. The problem is figuring out what the problem is in the first place, because you can't solve it if you don't understand the problem. And so maybe we should start this conversation along those lines. You'll notice that what we heard, except maybe a little bit from Zaid, is mostly about the accessibility of the infrastructure as opposed to the accessibility of the applications. I care a lot about that. I'm hearing impaired. I like captions, for example, and people who are blind like screen readers, or well, they may not like them, but they tolerate them. That's sort of at the application level of accessibility and inclusion. But a lot of what we talked about today is about physical access. So I want to start with the question that you raised, which is, what is the next big problem that needs to be solved in this road ahead? And I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular unless nobody responds, in which case I will pick on somebody. So what do you suppose, group, is the next most important problem that you think we should be solving to achieve digital inclusion of physical access anyway? Where are we? Yes.
Well, so Vin, I would tell you, I tend to think about the inclusion, the digital divide, actually in three big buckets, right? One is, can you get the connection? Which in itself is a rich topic, right? But let's assume that through government funding, the continued trajectory of technology, the willingness of people to go invest, we can get people the connection. Then it's kind of like, okay, so what? I'm connected. What do I need, right? Okay, you need the devices, right? It could be the smartphone, it can be the laptop, it can be the computer, what have you. The thing that I found very interesting, I'd given an invited talk at one of the conferences on digital divide, and I went in RTFM. You would recognize what RTFM, I think, means. About this, especially because it's often, they contrast it with what we did with rural electrification many, many years ago, right? If you go study that, there was actually a component to the Rural Electrification Act that was called the REA Circus, where they would actually go out and show the farmer, okay, here's an electric water pump, here's an electric range, here is the thing you can do once you have electricity. And to me, that was a bit of an aha, right? I think that's a piece of this puzzle is, it's the connection, it's the device, but it's also the education of what to do with it, right? It's the training, it's understanding, and you might even wrap into that, that's the applications that go along with it, right? You have to have those things in place, and understanding it's not just games for the kids, right? That there's real educational capabilities, that there's knock-on, benefits to the local economy. To me, that's a big component to this solving the digital divide, because a lot of people, it's like, okay, my kid wants it, I got it, what's it do for me? Right? And I think that it's kind of that three-legged stool we got to solve to get real progress, to my mind.
So this is sort of like the fiber guy shows up and the recipient, the beneficiary, says, where am I supposed to stick this? And you can imagine various answers to that. But the thing that I find most concerning, frankly, is that most people are not going to get service from the fiber directly. They're probably going to plug it into a hotspot, and they're going to deliver it by Wi-Fi, and they may even end up with repeaters, and they may have a hell of a time getting that configured to deliver the capacity that the cable is capable of delivering. So it occurs to me that we might want to do something about that. And I'm going to wander off for a second. You're already elevating.
Well, no, I was going to say that's half the problems in people's experience with the internet. Half the problems are in the house, and 90% of those is Wi-Fi, right? So making an improvement on the Wi-Fi infrastructure.
Okay, here's a crazy thought. Some of you presumably may be tracking the 6G stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be just outside, communications. It could be interior as well. And the interesting thing about 6G is that it has application level ability to communicate with the control of the communication system. And whether that's radio, or it could even be fiber or coax or something else, it doesn't matter what the bearing medium is. The architecture would allow you to do configuration to say something to the service, what it is you're trying to accomplish. But I want to try something in the other direction. Wouldn't it be interesting if someone who's supplying internet service could help auto-configure the Wi-Fi or the 6G or the 5G radio services in order to optimize its operation? People offered to do that to get your laptop to work well, but I don't know of anybody that offers to do auto-config on the radio part of your access to the system. So maybe that's another problem that we should be thinking about. I want to come to Zaid for a second because of your work in AI. That can sometimes influence the quality of service that you're able to deliver from the inclusion point of view. I don't know whether accessibility is part of your AI portfololo, but if it is, perhaps you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely, I think, part of the portfolio, and I want to sort of set some context, right? We are training extremely large models to sort of achieve like even some of the AI generality, like for example, an AI system that can apply for a job on your behalf, let's say, and let's say you're living in a rural community. Imagine a system that can, as you're having a conversation over dinner, the Alexa thing picks up and says, hey, somebody needs a job. Hey, by the way, I've applied 5 jobs for you, and here's your first interview. That would be like an ideal situation. But to me, like, that problem is broken down by taking large amounts of data, figuring out a way to get all these large amounts of data onto the data center, which is all about connectivity, bandwidth, and everything, and then doing inference on the devices themselves, which are in your home, right, that are going to make these intelligent inference decisions that are real time. For that, you need a connectivity, like, so you need to solve that digital divide problem. And secondly, you need fast and reliable connectivity in order to give that, right? That's sort of one example. The other one is, autonomous cars are exploding, right? That's another area where we have a big gap. There's immense amounts of data that still sits in cars that have to be, uploaded every night. And the amount of data that's transferred between cars, I think last night Eva was telling me, it's like something around 20 to 30%, which is really a small number, right? And to me, like, that's going to be solved by the newer technologies of 5G deployment, 6G, whatever we're talking about. That hasn't actually happened, right? So to me, like, all of this sort of helps with inclusion. Like, we will become better at delivering this AI and service as these systems get better. Yeah.
So one of the things that we've discovered at Google is that the machine learning algorithms are getting better and better at understanding speech and synthesizing speech. They're even gotten to the point where they can take people whose speech is impaired and understand it well enough to produce better quality speech with something called euphonia, which means good sound. And so I'm seeing more and more opportunities to apply machine learning methods. As imperfect as they can potentially be, they're striking. There's another application called Live Transcribe, which takes sound in from a room like this and just transcribes it on your mobile. And your point about keeping things on the device, fabulous, because privacy is preserved. It never makes it into the cloud if it isn't necessary. So Nick, question for you is, what bumps are we expecting in the road ahead?
Anybody with a business is trying to scale that business. And if you're trying to scale the business, inevitably you're thinking about technology and how that can launch you forward. And if that's going to scale, your technological needs are going to scale, and your need for data and your need for access is going to scale as well. So the needs we have right now for connectivity could be exponential in the coming years as we bring in new sectors, new technologies, businesses grow. So that continuing scaling is really going to be the biggest challenge I think we have.
One of the side effects of scaling sometimes is called economy of scale. And it often turns out that in order to achieve scale, you literally have to build larger and larger facilities. That's why big data centers are less expensive to run per capita than a bunch of small ones. So economy of scale may actually turn out to be an important metric, and for many people that's a surprise because they wonder, how come these companies get big? And the answer is because there was an economy of scale driving it. Let me ask you the same question. What bumps are there in the road ahead?
So certainly digital literacy, as you brought up, is a significant challenge when you're in a rural area. And it does go back to some of the stories we had from when we first brought electricity in, where we would wire a house that had no electric devices in it, and the people who lived there would be concerned when the lineman was finished with the wiring, saying, well, I don't have a light bulb. Is the electricity going to run out? Do I need to put something in that socket? They didn't understand fully how to use it. So the electric co-ops, as you mentioned, had co-op kitchens, they had co-op circuses. There's another co-op in Virginia that has created a co-op living room for digital literacy to bring people in and just show them the basic smart televisions, devices that connect to the internet through the Internet of Things, and start the conversation in rural areas about how you can make use of the internet. That's number one. Number two is the affordability, and that's really important. We participate in the federal program. Again, the state has done a good job of trying to make sure that there's public-private partnership funding to help keep the cost down so that it's affordable to get in. But that's going to be an ongoing issue to make sure we really reach out and make every home, make it possible that they can get on the internet. So that's a nut we're still working to crack completely. And then finally, as you pointed out, this scaling of and with some of the things you mentioned earlier with students in education, the scaling of people to support networks as they build out, again, in rural areas, and some of the young folks who were in high school earlier, the best talent we can have in rural areas to help some of the people who maybe are a little more advanced in age, like me and my parents, are some of the young people who are more familiar with technology coming up and some of the things that they can learn and help bring their communities along. And I think we're going to need to keep that pipeline going so that we can really maximize the use of this great infrastructure we're building.
So, Stefan, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but something Nick said really triggered my imagination. You mentioned scaling. And I was thinking about Internet of Things. And it occurs to me, I used to tell jokes that every light bulb would someday have its own IP address. Haha, isn't that funny? Well, now that's not so funny because a lot of them do have IP addresses, like the Philips Hue, for example. And then I got to thinking what it would be like to live in a house with a few, maybe 100 light bulbs, each one of which has its own IP address. And then the voice interaction systems that we're all starting to make use of, Google Assistant, Alexa, Siri, and so on, where you get to interact with the devices in your home by voice. Then the question is, if you have 100 light bulbs, do you have to give them names like George and Frank and Eddie in order to say, turn George on and turn Freddie off? And what happens if you have a guest that comes over? How do you introduce them to the house so that they can manage it, like get the toilet to flush and things like that? And then you have to worry about the possibility that the bad guy shows up at the front door and says, open the door, and the dumbass door actually understands exactly that and opens up for him. How do you distinguish among the people who might be interacting with your IoT devices, and what authorities do they have? And then it gets worse because you're parents, right? And you have kids, right? And the kids turn out to they should not have as much authority over the system as the parents do, except for the fact that the kids understand how to make it work better than the parents do. So now these are all scaling challenges that we have to deal with. I don't know if you wanted to react to that.
And that's just one house, and now there's millions of them being built. So.
And you didn't make a digital twin of it and put it in the metaverse, so there's there's going to be even more of these things.
And by the way, we've solved the IP problem, right, by IPv6. So,
So Stefan, I wanted to ask you, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges that you know about? I mean, we've heard about some of them, the scaling and affordability, driving cost out. What about reliability, security? What other things occur to you that we should be attentive to as we try to, look, think about this, we're trying to push internet on people who may or may not know how to use it or trust it. So how do we get there?
How do we get trust?
How do we get
exactly.
to trust this thing?
No, but I think you can separate this question or answer it in a few different ways, right? I think one of the things, and that's been touched on a lot during the day today, that's just the diversity and the security of the internet in itself, so that it's actually up and running and operational in that stage. Even if you have outages and problems and whatever, right? But security, I think, is definitely something that is a concern, and I think that's a concern on all different layers within the ecosystem as well, right? Whether you're on the network layer, as we are, on the connectivity layers, or you're in the application layer, and I think the industry together is really trying to work on those matters for sure, to secure it in a better way. But we also have to remember that, I mean, the basics of the internet from the very beginning was very trust-based, and that was really the fundament of how it was constructed by someone in the room, maybe even, right? So and I think that is something that we're carrying with us. It is really a business-critical environment today. It is entire business models relying on being on the internet. That also means that there will be people that would try to shoot certain things down and really impact it in a very negative way. And there, I think there are more and more mechanics coming into place that is protecting what was previously just trust-based. But we also have to realize, I think, that we've had 20 years of a very good run of a lot of trust in the global markets as well, where I definitely geopolitically see that there is a lot of differences between regions today that we didn't necessarily have 15, 20 years ago. So that is a concern, and I think we really just need to staff up and man up, essentially, right, to really protect the basic infrastructure of the internet as well, to ensure that that's always operational.
There's a kind of supreme irony here, because when we started working on this for the Defense Department, we knew it needed to be secured. We included crypto and a bunch of other things. In fact, at the time, in 1973, public key crypto hadn't been invented yet, so we were using much more clumsy mechanisms, but we knew we had to incorporate that. Then public key crypto comes along, which improves key distribution. I'm running the program in the Defense Department, and I'm trying to get the protocols frozen so we can implement it to see if it actually works. And my first thought was, I am not going to ask a bunch of graduate students to exercise the discipline that they would need to manage crypto keys, because I didn't think that they would be very interested in that. So I said, let's put that off, because I know I can retrofit that into the system, which is why some people come and say, what were you thinking? And that's my defense. Also, at the time, we didn't actually think of people wanting to wreck the system. We were trying to get it to work. So it didn't occur to me that somebody would want to mess it all up. But we're running out of time.
Well, just very briefly, I think, but it's also what's actually been driving the enormous success of internet developing so quickly, is that it was trust-based.
We didn't.
Right?
Well,
it wasn't a lot of hindrances in there, right?
We trusted each other. In fact, it's still the case, I think, today that 80-some-odd% of all of the peering agreements are a handshake deal, that they're not documented with contractual things and everything else. I send my traffic to you, you take it and deliver it, I take your traffic and deliver it, end of story. And it's no one would believe that. If you walked in and said, this is how it's going to work, they'd throw you out of the office. Fortunately, nobody paid any attention, so we got away with it. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you to try to generate, maybe in one sentence, what is it that you think is the highest priority thing we should be paying attention to achieve digital inclusion, especially in this region? And I'll start at that end. There you go.
I was worried you were going to ask me first. I believe that the state, and again, the Department of Housing and Community Development that runs the grant programs, and the governor's office have really stepped out to give us all of the incentive to get everybody connected. But from my perspective, now the execution of that's the priority. The next 3 years, we've got supply chain challenges, we've got other challenges coming up, but we've got to get that accomplished. Right now, it's a promise, and we need to turn it into a reality. That's the first thing for me.
Nick?
I think there's a trickle-up effect. I think integration in K through 12, and not just having computer science and not just having video games, but having technology integrated into every single thing that happens in K through 12 is going to trickle up for everyone.
Oh, I love that. Trickle up. Zaid.
So I mean, I have to agree with my colleague here. I think that education is a huge aspect. I mean, I'm not from the area, but like, you know, if I were to put my hat on, I think that as we are sort of building, you know, much more complex systems and building, you know, like if I were to use sort of AI as an aspect, there's tons of opportunity for a younger generation to build upon all of that. There's not like where sort of like the things that I think about at the moment, yeah, is that programming has become like so easy, right? Like you have Copilot now that you don't even have to write code. You can write a high-level statement, it writes code. Frees the mind of sort of the next generation to do other things and build upon that. So you know, and all of this is based on very solid underlying infrastructure, all the way from connectivity down to like data centers. So you have to think about power all the way down to moving the bits on the end. So I think that, you know, if we were to have the inclusion aspect, I think, you know, educating our next generation and how to build upon that is a very vital aspect.
I'd say put the KPIs, the key performance indicators, key program indicators in place, measure them, report on them, and have the perseverance to get it done.
Right on target.
Okay,
Stefan?
so I'll do from the network layer a little bit then, maybe in data centers, but permitting, power, and funding, I would say is.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The last word, well, almost the last word of the day, at least the last panel. Let me thank the panelists for sticking out, all
Thank you.
day. And let me thank you for staying with us for the day. We have a little bit more to go.